get engaged and your network will grow leaps and bounds, and you didn't do anything but write an article or attend a meeting and participate.
This is Facility Rockstars, the podcast that celebrates the unsung heroes of our daily lives, facility professionals. I'm your host, Jay Culbert. Join me as we honor these great leaders, sharing stories, insights, and expertise that empower us all to learn and grow together. Facility Rockstars is sponsored by Culbert, operating the way you operate in order to make your life easier.
Welcome back to Facility Rockstars. I'm your host, Jay Culbert. Today's guest is a passionate engineering leader dedicated to transforming how projects are delivered across the pharmaceutical and biotech industries. With more than 20 years of experience, she specializes in commissioning, qualification, and validation, developing innovative strategies that improve efficiency, strengthen collaboration, and deliver measurable value. Over the course of her career, she's led large-scale capital projects, implemented global risk-based C&Q programs, and built communities of practice to share knowledge and best practices across networks. She currently serves as the CQV and Operational Readiness Lead at A-Bio. Stephanie White, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jay. I'm thrilled to be here.
We
I'm
are thrilled to
excited.
have you.
Yes, absolutely.
So we go back, and we're going to get into this a bit, but you and I I was fortunate enough to meet you in Foxborough at Gillette Stadium
Mhm.
last year at the ISPE product show. So I'm really glad we got to connect there.
Yeah, it's exciting. I was there doing a presentation, and it's always a fun time to go to the Boston Products Show, and I was very thrilled to meet your group as well.
Excellent. Well, we're glad you're here. And I'm going to start us off with, over all the years you've been working, all your professional achievements, what's been your biggest lesson learned?
That's a great question. I would say the biggest lesson I've ever learned is that being technically strong isn't enough if you're trying to operate in isolation. And let me explain that a little bit. Early in my career, when I was bringing up pharmaceutical manufacturing facilities, um, I was, we had the usual like tough schedules, startup issues, inspection pressures. And I was just trying to solve everything within the confines of the four walls in which I worked. I never really had anyone to bounce ideas off of or any external professional networks to ask, how would you solve this problem? So I would work really hard, but, it was often like reinventing the wheel. There was a lot of trial and error, stress, sometimes slower decision making, just simply because I didn't have that broader perspective of how others had done this successfully. And through that experience, it really shaped how I think about the importance of building professional networks.
I think that's and that's really the foundation of why you and I agreed it'd be a good idea to
Hmm.
do the show together, right?
Yeah.
We're doing it because Facility Rockstars is a community, ISPE is a community. You've built, when you're going to get into this, several other communities. We work with IFMA, AFE, so it all just
Hmm.
came together. Now, you mentioned working in isolation, and you say more about how you've built these networks, and yeah, please expand.
Yeah, absolutely. The turning point for me was really just getting involved with ISPE. And I don't know if your listeners know exactly what that is. It's the International Society of Pharmaceutical Engineering. And, I decided not to just to be a name on a list. But at first I did just attend conferences, sat in sessions, took notes, brought it back. And it was helpful, but that was still pretty passive. Things changed when I started working for a company, and one of the folks or colleagues there asked me, "Why don't you become part of the commissioning and qualification steering committee? I need someone to fill in when I'm not able to make it." And so I said yes. So as soon as I said yes and started engaging, really everything changed. And that yes grew over time to not just kind of sitting in on a committee meeting, but actually taken on bigger roles, such as I said yes to becoming a secretary and or was a secretary of that committee for a few years. Then I became the co-lead for a few years, and this year I'm actually the lead of this international committee. It's also led to me helping write guidance documents. I was a author, co-author on the Good Engineering Practice Guide, and recently I was a lead on the digital validation guidance document, which was just published back in April of 2025. So I have been able to not just sit and take notes on a committee, but it's led to, you know, engaging and being part of a bigger organization, and it's gained me valuable network and colleagues from all over the world and locally.
That's fantastic. I might want to jump into those two documents you wrote too, by the way, those two pieces.
Okay.
Um, well, first I want to go back into your network more because you've mentioned that not only ISPE, but other networks you've built over the years, and that's maybe within one company with several sites. Could you speak to that and the value that was created there?
Absolutely. So, as I was working in a global role, I've worked in a global role at several companies, and part of that was to do the harmonization of our particular work stream, commissioning, qualification, and validation. And as part of that, I would there would be several sites that would be doing, you know, their work streams within this commissioning, qualification, and validation. And these community of practices were basically to help harmonize and streamline these practices at the site. So everyone would be doing things in a similar fashion. And that's really important when you have regulatory inspections that you're doing the same type of activities or the same practices at each site. For regulatory purposes. And all it was really having monthly calls with the sites, having representatives come in on the call. I would actually let them present topics at their sites, and then we would have discussions around any challenges that they had, any ways that they'd solved it. Other folks could chime in and go, "Hey, we've had that same thing happen at our site, and this is how we solved it." So it really not only brought people together from each site and we became that community, but also it gave them valuable engagement within that community. It wasn't just me talking, but they were able to present and engage and help each other out with similar problems at the sites. Plus, it was a great way to deploy global harmonization activities. And sometimes when you deploy these things at sites, you get a lot of resistance to that change. But when the folks were actually involved and engaged in that change, they
Mm.
embrace it, and it's a lot easier to have these changes filter out throughout the sites and how we do our practices.
I want to key on a few things you said there, but one was the engagement and involvement of people creating it with you, not just you creating it. Could you just speak to the how behind that again? Because I think that's something many of us struggle with. We try to roll something out, we think it's excellent, yet maybe didn't involve the right people in the creation of it.
Exactly. So there have been many times when I've been, I guess, the end user of that. In other words, the program was created and I was told, you know, you need to give up what you're doing and follow this, and this is what we're going to do. When you haven't really been involved with that, it brings a lot of fear and change or how is this gonna affect my workflow or what, you know, what are the implications? Did they even think of these 5 things, how we work, you know, how is this gonna happen? But, then I was on the end where I actually had to create the program and roll it out, and because I had been that end user, I knew the fear, and the things that would go through people's minds. So I was able to take, folks I would, contact folks at each site. There usually is a kind of a validation lead at the sites, and they would be involved, and I would ask them if any of their folks would like to be involved in these communities of practice. And as they joined and we had these meetings and people would engage in them. And then when we were talking about, well, how could we make this better from site to site? and they actually gave their opinions. And then we took that information and created our governance documents from that. They had been part of that. So when it was deployed, they understood the implications. They understood what they needed to do. And because they were part of it, it just made them feel like ownership, like they owned it and they could actually do those practices at the work site without all this fear and frankly freaking out that happens when you have these deployments. So,
I love that story of how, you were you didn't say this, but I'll say the victim of being told versus being
yeah,
part of the process. That's great.
yeah.
Good for you. Well done. Good manufacturing or electronic validation. Any high level best practices that you would want to pull out of those and share now?
Yeah, so with a good documentation practice guidance document that I wrote, I think the major focus of that was how do we create a good engineering practice that would be usable in commissioning and qualification. So, what typically happens in my industry is um, we have design build, and a lot of documentation comes into the facility. And when you get to the qualification activities, a lot of those engineering activities were just kind of thrown over the fence to the validation folks. And so when we would go out and do testing, which is what validation is or the qualification, we go out and we test the systems against specifications. A lot of times these things wouldn't work. And and then our activity, we would have a lot of deviations and discrepancies that we would have to deal with. So part of good engineering practice is just to get engineers to understand how to document appropriately for a regulated environment. And this guidance document kind of helps you set up those processes and systems to help you generate documents with the thought in mind that this is going to have to go into a qualification activity. And so if you have the good engineering practice up front, now many companies have different levels of maturity. So obviously the more mature companies have better engineering practices. It just this is kinda to help those companies that may not be mature. How do we establish these? But this documentation is typically, I would say, leveraged, I'll put that in air quotes, so that we
Mhm.
don't have to repeat the testing and qualification because it is acceptable by the quality unit just because of these engineering practices that they followed, which are good engineering practices.
Mm.
So that's really what the guidance document is. It's to um, help mature companies get better or to help an immature engineering department. Do we establish this? How do we set this up? So and it has a lot of templates in it as well to help out how to write a user requirement and other document types that would be part of design and build for a pharmaceutical facility.
Hey, rock stars. If you're tuning into the podcast and are feeling overwhelmed by all the maintenance demands at your facility, don't stress. We've got you covered. Our sponsor, Culbert, is your go-to partner to help you tackle all those demands and get them done right, on time, and with top-notch quality. From project planning to execution, Culbert is there to make hard work easy. Visit culbert.com today to get started. That's outstanding. I think maybe we should call it out right now. This will be in the show notes too, Stephanie, but how do people access this material?
Well, this particular guidance document, it's a document that is for sale. It's not a free document. If you're a member of ISPE, it's a little not as expensive, but if you're not, it's a little bit more expensive. They're a little bit pricey. But if you have a facility and engineering department that sets budget for some type of education, um, there are subscriptions that you can get that aren't as expensive. I don't recall what company does the subscriptions now because it changed since I've last done it. But if you talk to your engineering director, they should be able to kind of point of, where these subscriptions are. Or, as an engineer, just request that your manager or director purchase these documents so that you can put them in your engineering library, just like you would have to buy any kind of standard. This again is something that you would have to purchase.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to jump back to creating standardization in regulated environments. And you've been with a lot of different companies and you're consulting
Mhm.
now. What are some of the areas where you see the most common pitfalls or where standardization should exist yet does not? And what advice could you give around that?
Standardization in a regulated environment, every company, as I mentioned, when you have a large company or even a small company with a few sites, it's very important for regulators to see things done in a standard fashion. That one site that might do the similar process is doing it the same way as another site. And some of the pitfalls of that again is I think the biggest pitfall I've seen is the fact that the large companies will go and acquire other companies. And so these other companies aren't really doing what the main company did. And so you kind of have that tension between this company, how they did things, and this company, how they did things. And it makes it a lot more difficult to do standardization when there's all this acquisition going on. So I think that's been the biggest challenge is through these acquisitions, just trying to align the process and the procedures is very difficult and takes quite a long time. I one acquisition I spent almost a year and a half. There were 70 SOPs coming from different companies, and we were having to make them all one for one company. And then as soon as we finished that, the company was acquired again. And all that 18 months of work, we had to start over. So I was like, wow. But that's what happens. Companies get acquired, they're publicly traded. So this is kind of what happens and just expect it. It's not easy to do standardization and it does take a long time
Hmm.
just to make sure that you set up your governance documents correctly. So I think the biggest thing is the acquisitions that happen.
Okay. That's good advice right there. That's it'd be a little frustrating once you finish. Here's
Yeah.
another acquisition. So you mentioned SOPs. I want to just jump back to we had a couple of previous guests on the show last year, and they both come from global companies, publicly traded global companies, and it was staggering to me to hear. And I might be a little off on the numbers, but it was close. One of them had like 35 or 38 SOPs,
Hmm.
right? The other one had I want to say almost 200, and they're saying, how can you manage that many? And so my question for you in relating that story is there a sweet spot? Have you found that there is a set of procedures that's the right set?
Well, I mean, they just vary based on the workflow. So whatever you're writing procedures for are going to be different, different numbers of them. I know maybe just from a manufacturing side, there are a lot of procedures that go with batch records, and they're different from the ones that I do. But the procedures that I've done for my particular work stream, I have usually try to set it up in a Visio. I have, and a couple people have stolen this from me, and it's okay if people steal this from me. I create a Visio swim lane where I start with our policy at the very top of what regulations that we need to meet kind of document or a policy with those regulations in it. The next, I guess, swim lane would be what are we going to do to meet those regulations? And those might be our global commissioning qualification and validation procedure. It's a life cycle that you go through. Like you create a user requirement, you have a design qualification, you do system risk assessments, and there's different deliverables. And so this document would kind of list those out of what we do to meet the regulation. And then the third swim lane would be the supporting documents for our C&Q global document, and that would be a separate document. I mentioned in the global document we would have you have to write a user requirement. Well, then the next level would be this is the URS or user requirement document, and this is how you're going to write it. And then the fourth level would be the actual executable or the form that which would be the URS template. And so if you think that that's for URS. And the next one would be design qualification. Well, we have to do design qualification. That's the next document that supports that would be, you know, how we go about doing a design qualification. And then the lower level of that would be the actual executable template for that. So
Mm,
creating that kind of hierarchy from these are the regulations. This is what we're going to do to meet them in the global document. And then your supporting documents of how you're going to do that with your executables underneath that folks can pull out and use. And you put all these in a document management system. Of course, they reference each other. And then,
mhm.
kind of, I'm going to go create this qualification package. What documents do I need? And so that's kind of laid out in that Visio map.
Wow.
That was a
That
long
was a
answer.
No, that was a great answer. That was a really great framework right there, and I
Yeah.
think people might re-listen to that section quite a bit, and I know I'm going to. I like how you said swim lane too, it just really lands. With all of the things we've covered so far, what is there a piece of advice, just generally speaking, from your seat and everything you've created and seen done properly or not properly? What advice would you give people?
Yeah. I think the biggest advice I would give people is, make sure, draw them back to that professional network. Make sure that you get involved with a professional network in whatever industry that you work with. And don't just be a passive member, actually become active, and it will help you build your network organically. You don't even have to try to build it. And through this, anytime you run across an issue, you always have someone to reach out to. For example, I've had a couple of questions that I might not know the answer to because it may be more in a quality space and I'm more in a design engineering space. So I have quality colleagues, and I have a friend that I will text with a quality question, and I'm not kidding, within 10 minutes, he's answering me.
Mm,
So, that's always a good thing. And then when you go to conferences and attend them, you get to meet all the folks that you see online with each other, and you get to meet them in person and get to share ideas. And I think that's the biggest thing is just building those relationships. I would highly recommend just building relationships. You don't have to go to like a networking party just to sit around and eat hors d'oeuvres and have a beer and not really talk to people. But if you get involved in these organizations, these professional organizations, and you engage, like I said, it builds organically. You don't even have to try to build it. Or another thing, to have people, I do post a lot of content on LinkedIn, and I write posts, but they're not long posts. It'll just like the framework that I just mentioned for developing that hierarchy. I'll create a little document like that and talk about it and just dump it right on LinkedIn. And I have built a pretty strong network of folks through that process that are outside of any professional organization I've joined. So I have a lot of folks that um, I connect with through LinkedIn, and I do enjoy that perspective because that's free. I don't have to pay.
right.
I don't have to pay to join
Right.
anything, And as I said, it just builds organically, and it's just kind of led to other things that I've been doing. So it's
Outstanding.
yeah, just get engaged and your network will grow leaps and bounds, and you didn't do anything but write an article or attend a meeting and participate.
Outstanding. Excellent, excellent advice, Stephanie. I completely agree with you. That's why we build community. That's why we do this. Um, so, a question before we get to your contact info and whatnot. Are you going to the product show in Boston again this year at Gillette?
Absolutely. Yes,
I can't.
I always do since I'm part of the community of practice with the steering committee with ISPE, we're asked to do like a 30-minute talk, especially the leaders, which I'm the lead. Last year, the lead somehow got us an entire hour. So I was able to give a talk, an example of how to actually implement a risk-based approach for commissioning and qualification. I did a case study and presented that. So that was exciting. I'm hoping that I can get that hour this year, but usually they
Yes.
only give us 30 minutes. So I'll definitely be there because it's a really cool show. And the after party was awesome. We get to, of course, the Patriots are in the Super Bowl, and
Oh, yes, we are.
we get to put the ring out. We got to put the 6 rings on our fingers,
Hmm. Hmm.
maybe 7 next
Hmm.
Boston Product Show, keeping our fingers crossed, and, just thought it was just so much fun. It's probably one of my favorite conferences to attend, actually. I liked it better than the annual meeting that was in Charlotte, but that was fun too. We got to go to the, NASCAR museum and kinda drive a NASCAR simulation and race each other.
Oh,
I
cool.
I kept wrecking the car. I was like, "Why is this so difficult?"
Well, I echo that sentiment. It's really they do a nice job in Foxborough. They really do.
Mhm.
And I'll definitely attend your. I wasn't in your session last year, but now that we know each other
Yeah,
and I know about it,
absolutely.
I'll be there. And
Yeah.
I don't know if we'll see each other before the show, but I'll be there, and I will give you your Facility Rockstars Challenge coin when I see you there. Too.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So you dropped a ton of knowledge and process and frameworks. So how would people get in touch with you if they're not going to wait until the ISPE show to see you? How would they reach out if they had more questions?
If you have more questions, you can contact me through LinkedIn. It's Stephanie J. White. So you have to put the J in there. And to make sure that you get up with me, you can message me through LinkedIn. I think that's probably the best way to contact me right
Perfect.
now. And yeah. And just to let you know, next, I think in March, yes, the ISPE Pharmaceutical Engineering Magazine. I think I have 2 articles coming out in that, and they asked to do a profile on me. So if you get that copy, you'll see me there as well.
Outstanding.
So
That's
yeah,
awesome. Well, Stephanie, thank you again for being on the show, sharing all your wisdom and knowledge and best practices, and really just investing your time today with me. So thank you very, very
absolutely.
much.
Well, thank you for having me on. It was a thrill and exciting. I enjoyed it.
Absolutely. And for everyone listening, I'm certain you learned something in this session. And if you want to reach out to Stephanie, now you know how. It's been another great episode of Facility Rockstars, and we'll catch you next time.
It's a wrap. Another episode of Facility Rockstars is in the books. Facility Rockstars is sponsored by Colutus, operating the way you operate in order to make your life easier. Until next time, facilitate and rock on.